You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by
Chrissy, Mancini, Nichols.
And Jerome Horne.
Hey all, welcome back. Welcome to post-election world.
Yeah, we're out of practice.
I know. It's been a little while. How have you all been since we saw you last on election night?
Same. It's like inside, working. And how about you, Jerome?
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same myself, just trying to, keep things moving, keeping people moving in Indianapolis and trying to stay sane and safe.
Yes.
That's good, staying sane. What are the things that you do to stay sane? I'm asking for a friend.
Well, I know for me personally, I like to work out a lot, so that's really helpful. Going for long walks around the city, listening to music and podcasts is really helpful, and long bike rides. So those are kind of my activities to stay sane.
Yeah. We take a lot of walks. In fact, my husband and I were just walking Bob before we recorded to check out the planets. And we saw that. We saw Jupiter and Saturn. So if you can get out tonight, it's so cool.
That's awesome.
I don't know if you, Jerome, it might be a little late for you because we tried to see them last night and it was a little later and I think they were too low in the sky to see. But tonight it was like right after sunset and they were just the only thing in the sky tonight besides the moon.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know. It might be a little late for me since it's after 9 p.m. here, but I might step outside and take a look.
Yeah.
So Sophia, who edits the podcast, she had this whole thing on Instagram of her taking her telescope out to the beach and looking at the planets and their satellites. So I was excited to see that, and lots of people have been talking about it. So it's a big deal. What happens now? Like the planets are aligned in some way, and so is there something superstitious that's supposed to happen?
Well, have you ever seen that movie Melancholia?
No.
If you haven't, I was looking at it and I was thinking, whoa, I hope this isn't a Melancholia moment. But it's not. But I think it's just, well, that's what we were saying. I wonder what people thought 800 years ago when they saw these planets, because did they know what they were? Or, they thought maybe they were stars. Yeah, I just think they're aligned and close to the earth. And I don't think there's there is probably a superstition, but.
Maybe that's what was causing all my bad luck the last month. Man.
Well, that's not good to hear.
Well, I told you all my computer sagas, have I?
Oh, yes. I think I saw you posted about it.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so, we're doing this as a Zoom call, but none of us has our cameras on. And one of the reasons is because I don't have my laptop anymore. It's gone. The hard drive crashed. And then also, so the week after the hard drive crashed on that one, my video card on this computer crashed. I got it back, but during the middle of a podcast. And so the funny part of that story is that I tried to go to Best Buy to get some I try to get some cables to try to plug in other monitors or something to try to, figure out how to stop the podcast and save it. I did save it eventually, but when I got to the zip car, both of the windows were bashed in on the zip car.
Oh no!
And I was like,
not surprising.
I'm going to take the L today. I'm just gonna. This is enough for me. I'm not doing any work. I'm not doing anything.
Go back home.
Saturn and Jupiter got me. They got me. So yeah, that was my bad luck. And then 3 weeks before that, I had recorded a show where I didn't record the show. I didn't hit record, which, by the way, I hit record. And so
I heard that one.
and so we had to do it all over again, which was actually, it turned out well because, for those listening that listen to that podcast, I usually don't turn the questions around on my guests and be like, well, what did you have questions for me? And I just was talking for like an hour and a half and I was like, I just can't anymore. And it actually turned out to be a really good conversation. So maybe I should do that more often.
Yeah.
But
I actually listened to that today. So I noticed that and I was like, ooh, stumping.
yeah, we had a really good conversation, and Katie Knight is really nice, and it was just like I was almost at the end of my rope, and I was almost, I had thought about postponing it altogether, and I was like, no, let's just do it. We're gonna do it. And then towards the end, I was like, okay, I ran out of questions. I crossed out all these questions, but I don't know which ones I asked and which ones I didn't ask because I did it twice, and so let's just have Katie ask me a question. So,
well, Jeff, when I start my own podcast, I'm definitely inviting you on so that we can interview you since you've interviewed so many people.
I know.
We'll just make sure we hit record and we'll be good. I hope you start one soon, Jerome, because I'd love to listen to that.
Yes.
Is it coming? Is it coming? Is it imminent?
In due time. In due time.
Okay. All right.
Well, you have to do the YouTube since you got that 10 out of 10 from Room Rater.
That's right.
You have to do a video.
Yes, I'm trying to assemble the pieces, get the lighting and the microphones. Well, yeah, hopefully in 2021. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Ooh.
It's like you're like announcing the new Mandalorian or something. Like
it's the teaser.
It's the teaser trailer here. I like it.
Coming soon to a podcast near you.
In a galaxy full of trains.
Where the doors open on the left.
Well, this is episode 78. Shut-ins Anonymous 101 is in session. So I wasn't actually planning on doing another Monday show this year, but we had this huge election extravaganza that you all were part of, and then we got a lot of content to share, and it gave us a bit more to talk about. So there's so much big news, and the announcement came out about the transportation secretary, and I figured, we should talk about that because it is such a big thing. It only happens, once in a blue moon, or once when Saturn and Jupiter get together. So I thought we should chat about it. So before we get to that, though, I will let folks know that I'm going to put a couple of links to stories I thought were interesting that we didn't get to chat about, and we're not going to chat about today. But in the last month, since we haven't done any shows, there's a couple of things that I think were kind of big and important, including one about how Mexico wrote the right to mobility into their laws, the fight between one-time friends, oil and car companies with electric vehicles on the horizon, and then also how Somerville, Massachusetts is going to put climate warnings on its gas pumps. I thought those were three kind of biggish stories that people might be interested. So if you want to read those stories, you can check them out in the show notes here or go to theoverheadwire.com and we'll put them in there as well. And also the usual, podcast following stuff applies. Go to iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, and of course Apple Podcasts if you want to download this show and other shows as well. So thanks to the supporters for supporting the show. But we should just get to our main discussion. I mean, we're going to talk about Pete Buttigieg, and I think I got that right. Did I get that right? Are you all good at saying his name already?
Buttigieg.
Yeah,
Buttigieg.
That was good.
Hopefully we can get that right in the next 2 to 4 years, however long if he gets appointed. I mean, he got appointed, but if he gets confirmed and in office. So, I want to talk about former South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and he's been nominated to be Secretary of Transportation for the Biden administration. And I'd love to hear what the first things that came into your mind were when you heard of the nomination.
Well,
What was that, Chrissy? Wow.
I said, wow. We're not here talking about Rom. So
That's very true.
That was surprised.
Well, what did you feel about that kind of overall, like the leaks and stuff and the push for Rom? I know that you were in Chicago for quite a while, so that must have been an interesting thing to follow, Chrissy.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into we don't have to talk about Rom
No.
Yeah, I mean, I just think if you heard a name, it probably wasn't the right, people were just pushing for themselves. it wasn't who Biden was actually thinking about.
Yeah, it's kind of the way that I guess leaks go. But also, I feel like everybody had in their mind the person that they wanted it to be, and if it wasn't that name, they got a little upset maybe.
Yeah, or the people. I think people were just positioning themselves. And
so, Jerome, what did you think? What did you think when you first heard that it was Mayor Pete?
Yeah, I was definitely a little caught off guard, like I think many people in the transportation urbanist world. As you mentioned, there were so many names and leaks that were out there. But then I took a minute to let it process and sink in and kind of reflect on what I knew about Pete, just based on my experience in Indiana. And, the more I kept thinking about it, I went, well, actually, this could be a good strategic move. And my kind of thoughts behind that were just, well, this is someone who, can appeal to a kind of broad spectrum of people across the political spectrum. And, if we're going to get major infrastructure legislation bills, whatever have you, try to move anything forward, it's going to be good to have somebody who knows how to communicate tactfully with folks that may not be on board, for a pun, for transportation related things right off the bat. So, definitely was, like I said, shocked, but also thought about how this could be good for potentially moving some of those really difficult conversations forward.
What was your first thought?
I didn't, you know what? I was just kind of, I was watching Twitter and it happened, and then I just saw kind of the fights break out about it. And I was just like, look, this is it. That's what we got. And, that's not a negative or a positive. It's just, I guess maybe the rest of the year made me kind of into like okay, well, great. Let's go.
Yeah,
I'm done with this.
there were some arguments, but in the end, people sort of came around. I think I see more positives out there than negatives now. And even within those arguments, the role of the secretary is political foremost. I remember when Ray LaHood was appointed back in 2009, and I was so excited about President Obama's first transportation program, and he put this program out there. And I remember at the time I was working at Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago, and I presented the program to my board, and Ray LaHood had testified to Congress that he thought we should raise the gas tax, and the next day it was dead. So, I think there's so much, these appointments are political, and so much about what gets passed really is whatever Congress wants passed. The administration can guide some things and can definitely guide competitive funding, but it's about Congress more than anything.
I was just going to say, I think it was also good that people were highlighting, Chrissy, as you mentioned, like the secretary is, a very administrative, front-facing kind of communicator role, but obviously we have all of the administrations underneath that, and we have undersecretaries and deputy secretaries. And, kind of those second, third, fourth levels down are the people that are really kind of dictating the policy or doing kind of the grunt work to move things forward. So I think it'll also be interesting to see, who we get, in places like, federal highway and transit and all of that, because that could be, really fascinating to watch as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's where the policy happens is in some of those the undersecretaries and the folks that are kind of on the front lines in terms of not the political appointees, but folks that are in the administration or in civil service that are just at the FTA or at HUD or wherever. One of the interesting things that you mentioned, Jerome, is just the how communicating about things. And one of the things that I was kind of interested in at the end of the campaign was how Mayor Pete was going on to Fox News and discussing things and felt okay going into quote unquote the lion's den, as it were, the opposition, and feeling free to communicate things. I think that's one of his strengths, seems to be the way he communicates things. And I think similar to how I feel about Jeff Tumlin here in San Francisco is I really liked him because of not just the policy, but understanding that it was about communications and about getting on Twitter and saying kind of what is actually going on. And I think people have been really happy about that candidness. And I hope that, that's kind of something similar with Pete Buttigieg, is that he has that similar kind of rhetoric and ability to do that. Now, it could come back on him if he tries to sell something with his wonderful rhetoric that is not so good and people don't like. But I think if you explain things in plain terms and make sure that everything is understood and what it actually, what is actually happening, I think that's a bonus that maybe we didn't have with previous transportation secretaries who were just like, spitting out roads, freight, water, freight, water, roads. That's it.
That's such a good point, because when you look at, let's face it, any infrastructure bill that comes up has to go through the Senate, and the Senate has to agree on what it wants in that bill. And what we want in California or New York City is definitely different than what the senators from Oklahoma or any other state may want. And we don't have earmarks anymore to get things passed. You have to come to consensus. And I think the way that he is already communicating about systemic issues within the way we've invested in our infrastructure and highways that have broken up neighborhoods, he's already saying some of these things. And he's a mayor, he can talk to other mayors. I think he knows that people need to get reelected. Running on infrastructure helps them get reelected because they can cut ribbons. And if he can get in there and communicate why we need transit, or the way he's talking about people's pocketbooks and how transportation and the expense of transportation affects everyday life, not just like this big economy as a whole, but actual people's wallets, that's really effective and can maybe get people on board with certain, programs that they otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, I think, Chrissy, you mentioned the way he's communicating. And if I can, I'm just going to read a tweet that he put out yesterday that references the highways. He said, Black and brown neighborhoods have been disproportionately divided by highway projects or left isolated by lack of adequate transit and transportation resources. In the Biden-Harris administration, we will make righting these wrongs an imperative. So, I'm not sure that there has ever been a transportation secretary who's said that out loud like that, at least leading into it. I know Anthony Fox did talk a little bit about highways and how they kind of destroyed, him growing up in Charlotte. But, I do think that does matter, that he's acknowledging that and that those are the type of conversations that we need to have, and hopefully there'll be action with them as well. But absolutely, I couldn't agree more that I think the communication part is so critical to all of this. And one thing too, I think cities like South Bend, or really if you just want to use all of Indiana, if you look at like Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, South Bend, three kind of different size cities that are prototypical of most of America. And I think that those are the type of things that are going to be helpful in trying to push these infrastructure conversations forward, because you can relate to the majority of kind of the landscape and the land use of the country and some of those challenges that are presented by that.
Well, that's a good point about the geography that he worked in previously. I mean, the city is an interesting kind of district that is, in the United States, when you're talking about governing, you have, mayors, and then you go up to governors, and you have the legislatures and all these split up congressional districts and things like that. The mayor is kind of one of those people in, the politics of the United States that understands the details of what people are going through on a day-to-day basis from a functional standpoint, commuting to work, whether that's on a train or in a vehicle of some sort, understanding, all of the details that go together to make up, what people's lives are made up of. Whereas, a senator is kind of focused on this state level policy. Congressperson is, might be in a weirdly gerrymandered district, and they are focused on maybe what they were interested in when they got into office. But the mayor has to deal with those types of issues. I'm wondering what you all feel about kind of the idea of a mayor rather than, say, a senator or a congressperson, or even just a regular, expert that might be somebody else being in a position like this.
Well, I think I really think it will help move forward. Well, when you take a step back, most transportation funding is doled out either at the state or local level. I mean, they may get a certain appropriation at the state and they give it out to the locals and the locals appropriate it. And that's mayors. And when I worked with, not to mention his name again, but I was on Mayor Manuel's transition team for transportation, and we had this 10-point plan, and we were able to get almost everything in that plan passed because we pushed and pushed, to make sure that it happened. And if you can get a mayor talking to another mayor, he knows where they're coming from. He knows that, all politics is local, and mayors have to deal with people calling their office, and especially those small town mayors, as Jerome said, there's so many places that look more like South Bend than look like San Francisco. So he can relate to those mayors and understand where they're coming from, and he can make arguments for them to do things that he did in South Bend, like invest in complete streaks or bike share, or some database analysis rather than just filling or building something new, or not investing in potholes, or saying we don't need transit, no one takes it.
Right. Yeah. I think you touched on one point about data. I know he really likes data, and I think we always say, bring us data, more data, please. And I think he has a perfect combination of the data and the numbers, and also tell a compelling story that demonstrates the numbers. A mayor, like you said, they're on the ground. They are kind of directly, on in the environment, and kind of seeing and hearing and breathing it every day. So I think it is significant to have someone that is a mayor. And you mentioned the program that he did, the Smarter Streets program, which was something that I actually wasn't that versed in until recently. But those are the type of things that kind of make me feel a little bit cautiously optimistic, because I think like streets policy, and I know when he was running as a candidate, he actually had a pretty a Vision Zero, a national Vision Zero, policy that was part of that framework. And I think that's significant. I think there's a lot of work that we can do just focusing on the design of our streets and our roads alone that could really make drastic improvements to not only auto travel, but also pedestrians and transit and just safety overall. So I'll be looking forward to what this administration does in that light.
In terms of policy, it seems like the benefit of him running for president, for us anyways, is that we get to read his plan, right? And we can go through and see what he was talking about. And he had $1 trillion transportation plan, and some had criticized him for leading with the money rather than the policies. But he had things in there like transit and passenger rail, and thinking about electric vehicles, and even VMT funding instead of the gas tax, right, to transition us to an electric future. Did you all get to take a look at some of that stuff?
Yeah, and I liked that he was, I was reading some articles, some interviews he did as a candidate for president, and some of the things he said about designing for the future revolves around not designing around cars, but around human beings, but people don't have options that are reliable. So making sure that transportation options are balanced and support walking, biking, and transit. He talks about walking, biking, and transit a lot. And, even talking about a VMT fee, vehicle miles traveled fee over the gas tax, I mean, it's clear that he gets this stuff. And of course, he's going to have to, in the end, roll out Biden's plan, push for getting what Biden wants. And we know that probably more than any other president, Joe Biden believes in, he rides trains, he rides Amtrak, he gets that transit is an important component of our economy.
Yeah, one of the things that he helped advocate for additional funding for the South Shore train, which is one of the last remaining parts of the original interurbans in this country. The train basically connects South Bend to downtown Chicago. And there's actually significant funding that is coming to that train line to help build out extensive double tracking and some grade separation and hopefully running more frequency. but he made a lot of really good comments about how he understood the importance of this train connection to Chicago and the need for more robust service, and how that was, really positioning the region for, better economic prosperity. So, I think those things all point to someone who understands the importance of, the transportation network and the different scales and different types of investments that we need. And while he maybe, didn't run a huge department and billions of dollars of budgets and thousands of employees, I think that really getting those concepts right from the start, I think is really important.
Yeah, and he advocated for that line to not just stop at the airport, but actually stop in downtown, which I think is something that a lot of folks that, even mayors sometimes don't quite get. They just want the transit. They don't understand exactly why they want it, right? It's so I can get to the airport. That's great. But as we know, the airport lines aren't the most traveled lines in the country. I'm sure, Yona's said that a number of times. But I want to go back to what, the quote that I think Chrissy was mentioning, which was in City Lab in 2019, but I'll read the first sentence from it, which was, "Design in cities, especially through the 20th century, really revolved around the car. I'm trying to make sure that design for the future revolves around the human being." And that's just the kind of rhetoric that you don't hear from candidates that are in these types of offices usually, right? Because they're focused on driving and other transportation modes that we usually aren't championing. So I'm heartened by that rhetoric. And I also think that focusing on humans is, and we talked about it all the time on the Monday show, focusing on humans is way better than focusing on the vehicle or the conveyance that you're on. So I found that really heartening, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and I think both Pete's plan and Biden's plan too, they talk about focusing on humans and focusing on areas of high poverty and who needs transportation investments, maybe more than others, and how there's been disenfranchisement over the past many decades. So, they're talking about focusing on humans, focusing on areas of need. And I think another important part is Joe Biden's talking about climate change more than maybe any other president, and he's appointed climate czars and others. And I think what the transportation and the infrastructure bill will end up being, and what I'm sure the administration will push for, is that it's a climate bill. And we know that that's one of Biden's most important, priorities. So if the fact that he has Pete Buttigieg as the, person out there that's supposed to implement this, his climate policy, says just how important he thinks Pete Buttigieg is to his administration. And I think because Pete has ambitions beyond, Secretary of DOT, I doubt he wants to leave DOT and go be a lobbyist. He wants to do something big, and he knows that he's going to have to run on his record as secretary. So I'm sure he wants to get something big around transportation, climate. The economic recovery is going to be housed in transportation too. He's gonna have to fix transit, the airlines. He's going to convince mayors and senators and Congress that transit is needed, and it's not dead. So I think because he has those broader ambitions too, that he may do that more than any other secretary could.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that point is why I also think that some of the folks that are saying that this nomination doesn't really matter, or the Secretary of Transportation doesn't necessarily matter because it's it's Congress that funds things and set the priorities. I think that we learned from the Obama administration, and just like this in this administration, hopefully the focus is on climate. When we did the HUD, FTA, EPA, collaboration in the first Obama administration, that was something that Ray LaHood kind of, helped usher along. And so, those types of connections are what can really be made with a good transportation secretary and an EPA and all the other things that can make it all connect and actually, put forward an agenda. And if you don't have that person that's willing to work with it, and obviously somebody who's appointed by the president, they're going to work with them. But if they don't understand why, and they don't understand how those things all connect, then it makes it harder. But it doesn't necessarily not matter that person is there. And saying, that they can't screw things up or whatever. It's just an appointee position. I think it really is important from this connectivity perspective of thinking about the environment and housing and transportation as a whole, and not just individual parts that need to operate in their own silos.
Yeah, I think we have those conversations all the time where, people are always talking about, we're building this new BRT line, this new light rail train. And, it's just about this one project, but, one project doesn't just exist in isolation. And, there's that saying that every great transportation plan is also a land use plan. And so I think absolutely that it's good to see that people in these positions are going to, looks like they understand holistically how it is important to talk about all of these things at the same time and how they're all interrelated and connected and not disjointed pieces. And that's encouraging, to see from the start.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, is that, because transportation is also air and ports and water, there's so much more that is transportation other than highways and transit. And we really need, and infrastructure and broadband, so we really need this secretary to think about the system more broadly, and look at what he did as mayor with legalizing ADUs, accessory dwelling units. He reduced and eliminated parking minimums. That's more than most progressive mayors have done in California. So, I think at the local level, he was able to do that. And when you even think more broadly about what transportation has to tackle with autonomous vehicles, all the charging infrastructure that Biden wants to roll out, that requires upgrading our grid and modernizing our grid. He's going to have to deal with Uber and Lyft and getting our infrastructure and streets ready to roll out autonomous vehicles, and finally having the DOT take a role in that and creating some more standards. So he has a lot on his plate, and I think someone who can rely, like we were saying, we'll see who he brings on. There's also just a lot of people that have worked in US DOT for decades that he will look to. He's going to rely on all of them, and then he can, take it all as a whole and communicate it out more broadly.
Yeah, I hope he gets some fresh blood in there and so we can keep the wheels from grinding to a halt inside.
Chrissy, thank you for mentioning like air and sea, because I think that's sometimes it gets overlooked. I know, at least it seemed in some of the conversations, on the internet, everyone kept harping on, he has no transit experience. Transit's like, well, it's not the Secretary of Transit, it's transportation, which is multifaceted and multimodal, right? And, certainly airplanes and ships are still going to come into port, right? And so those things matter as well. The other part about the charging infrastructure and how that's all related to, the climate bill that we hope to see, and how we need renewable energy, because it's one thing to have electric cars, but if they're all still powered by coal, what are we really doing?
Exactly. Well, it's interesting because I'm working with a transit agency now. We're trying to think about how we can apply for this grant to build a microgrid for charging the buses through solar. And one of the things we have to do is upgrade. We have to figure out if the grid needs upgraded. Those are things that I think for transportation, at least and even for transit, we haven't really thought about before. We've definitely think about how do we provide the most efficient service and reach those in need. But, there's just all these modernization elements that we need to deal with. At airports, at ports, at, upgrading our grids, that it's having someone that is younger and can bring some new blood in, and it's not just the same old, we got to talk about 80-20 or something. I think is going to be, it could just be exciting to have someone there that can talk about this stuff and think more holistically and towards the future.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really huge, and I really appreciate I appreciate those comments too about thinking about how agencies are going to modernize. You hear all these things now about agencies having to think about, and I've had a number of folks on the podcast to talk about this, like how Seattle Light and Power has to coordinate with Sound Transit and King County Metro in Seattle about, how are we going to charge all these buses and how is it going to cycle? I just had somebody on the podcast that's going to come out after the new year talking about writing an algorithm to help the agency figure out how much battery life their buses will have on different inclines in the city. And those are like all the things that are connected that, before we might not have been thinking about that. We just thought, we filled up the gas tanks and they go. But there's all these things that are connected. And if we focus on them, we can really get something good out of it. I'm actually really excited about that type of stuff where it's this overlapping, really interesting kind of connection between that physical infrastructure between different sectors, because I think it's all very connected and it portends well for the future.
Yeah, one small example, here in Indianapolis, we have our electric buses on our BRT and a few other electric buses in our fleet, and we had to do some upgrades to facilities and work with our local power provider as well, building some new transformers and substations. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of thought that goes into this, but one of the coolest parts was for a lot of our mechanics to get experience on electric vehicles, and kind of have that dual understanding of what the differences are and the different components and what the characteristics are of an electric bus versus a regular diesel bus. And so there was a lot of kind of cool new learning opportunities for people that would allow them to be, more, hopefully we keep a hold of them, but would also allow people to be more marketable and more skilled going into the future. And so I think there's a lot of exciting things around, just new types of technology and new career opportunities or expansion of career opportunities for folks.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, tied back into an infrastructure program that is connected to climate and, jobs that are about solar and wind and not coal. And I would say one thing I hope that doesn't happen, given his background in consulting, even though I'm a consultant, is, I think oftentimes you hear these vague, we can do everything through a public-private partnership, or, we can just bring in a consulting firm and they can provide us the answers, and, we can get private financing. And, I think having done a lot of work in public-private partnerships, we know that those aren't the answers all the time. They can work in certain situations, but I hope there's the understanding of the reality of how transportation is funded, that even roads don't pay for themselves. And, just talking about this, relying on the private sector to solve everything, which I don't think would happen. I don't see, like in what he's saying now, I don't see that, but I hope, that's not a thing.
Well, one of my favorite quotes is George Lakoff, and one of his framing mechanisms is the Commonwealth for the common good. And I hope that, we can frame all of this stuff under that kind of umbrella of thinking about not just, we talk about modernization, we talk about the technical details and stuff, but, under those pillars should be, equity, and it should be, anti-poverty, and it should be all those things together. And I think if you think about it from those lenses, from building out our infrastructure and those types of things, I hope that they don't come to that conclusion that a lot of consultants, I think, that are just looking at the bottom line. You need to look at that triple bottom line, right, in order to make sure that everything comes out in the end for everybody, and not just a select few, which is we won't get into the bill that just came out today, but it's been sitting under my smokestack all day, and I'm not happy, but it is what it is. I'm wondering what to you all, what kind of, like, if Pete were to accomplish something, like what are some of the things you think that if he was to accomplish these things, it would be a successful run as the Secretary of Transportation? Like, do you have any like ideas in mind of like, if you would tackle this problem and get it going, what is that look like? Do you want me to give you an example first?
Go ahead.
Well, I think in terms of goals, we have dropping transit ridership. If we can solve some of that, if we can, get some more, clarity on these automated vehicle rules, if we can get down construction costs, this pandemic shift to freight in cities is a big thing I think we need to tackle. Congestion pricing, reducing pedestrian cyclist deaths, making sure we change the 80-20 split. Those are the types of things I'm thinking about. Like, if you can accomplish a goal, like, what are some of the things that you want to see accomplished?
Yeah, I think something like instead of just an 80-20 split or these arbitrary local matches, something around performance measures for how we spend transportation dollars, and really looking at, as you said, Jeff, those three bottom line components around equity in the economy, and figuring out a way to make sure that every dollar goes as far as it can. All the other measures you said, if we can get 5 or 6 of those done, I think that would be a success. But it could start with just having a better program for how we spend our money, and not just dole it out based on percentages.
Yeah, I agree there. For me, I would love to see really some type of national complete streets policy. I mean, I think there's just so much that could be accomplished by just having safer, better roads, and having more balanced or allocated space for different modes on our streets. So if we can get any forward motion on that, that'd be great. And then in terms of funding, operational funding for transit in particular, that's a big thing that I think would, we know that if we just simply ran more bus service, in every city, that alone could have a dramatic impact by just having more frequent, more abundant service, even in our existing footprint. So hopefully there's some change that can happen there, some momentum there on that conversation.
Yeah, and Yona had that really good report that he put out at the Urban Institute, where he is now, talking about how much it actually costs to do transit service in all these places. It's really not that expensive when you consider the costs of military and all the stuff we spend money on frivolously. It's really not that expensive to provide transit service to all the places that need it. I think, it might be interesting. I was doing a thought experiment with myself. I do this often. The last couple of days about transit service, and thinking about, what if we subsidize the lines, only the lines that are going into, low income and high need communities, or and left the other lines, almost a reverse privatization, where, they always talk about privatizing the Northeast Corridor and all this silly stuff because they don't want to pay for all the long distance Amtrak lines, for example, or cities, people who are more libertarian bent, I believe, they want to take the highest ridership lines and separate those out from the low ridership lines. But what if we did that in a positive way and thought about it from an access standpoint, an anti-poverty standpoint, an equity standpoint, where we're subsidizing those lines that might not, quote unquote, be profitable, right? That's a kind of I'm walking on the edge of a razor blade with that comment because of the language that it uses. But think about it from that perspective of we need to get transit service to people that need transit. Why don't we do it that way? And so, it's something I've been noodling around with, and I don't know if you all want to shoot holes in it, because it's something that I've just been, my brain's been rotating around the last couple of days, but it's something that popped up, and I'm glad that it was you prompted it, Jerome, because I've been thinking about it.
Well, I think it's a good, when you think about the suburbanization of poverty and where transit service is readily and available for people that need it. And people that can't afford to live in cities where there's more robust service, they're more and more being pushed out to exurbs and even further out where, they have to own a car. So, when I worked on the cost of segregation report in Chicago, we looked at how people in the lowest income areas were able to get to the job centers, and really their only option was a car. And that's, the south and southwest sides of Chicago, the southern suburbs, there just weren't transit options. So I think, Jeff, I think it's something we do need to think about. And if it is funding? Is it congestion pricing? Can he help lift the hold that the federal government has on letting states toll or congestion price highways, and then share some of that revenue with transit? I mean, there's a lot that you can do if you play around with the revenue sources and then, fund the places that have the most need.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen throughout the pandemic as service levels, or as ridership has declined in certain areas and stayed pretty high in others. And typically, especially with bus ridership, we've seen that a lot of buses are still some of the routes are still performing relatively well, and they tend to be in areas and neighborhoods, particularly Black and brown neighborhoods that actually need service. It makes sense to think about, well, where should we be providing better service, and do we really need some of these express bus routes that run way out into some parking lot somewhere? Could we do we need to bring those back and reallocate that and put it somewhere else? And I think that's a really good thing to consider about where are we really needing service versus where is it nice to have service, and who's it for, right? If we're very serious about equity, as that is a buzzword that's thrown around, but if we're really serious about that is something that needs close examination in terms of resources and making sure that we put services where the need really is.
So there's a couple of topics that I didn't quite get to, and I think we're running out of time a little bit. But I am heartened that the mayor went to Amsterdam, Oslo, and Copenhagen to look at bike infrastructure. Not a lot of people have done that, but if they do, they come back transformed, and maybe that's part of his understanding of what's possible. So I like that. It was interesting to read that he also protested with drivers outside of Uber's headquarters in 2019. I read that as well, and I was interested in that. And Biden was clearly against California's proposition that gave Uber kind of the keys to the castle. So I thought those two things were kind of interesting. And the final thing that maybe you all want to comment on, but maybe not. I really don't like "Build Back Better" as a slogan. I think it's kind of lame. So I keep seeing it in all these articles that I've read today. And I'm wondering what you all think would be maybe a better slogan, or what you feel about that existing slogan.
I'm not going to comment on this one.
Fair enough. Chrissy, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I don't have a slogan off the top of my head, but I will say the trip to Amsterdam and Copenhagen, we used to do that a lot with local, we would take a contingent to Mexico City or have Enrique Peñalosa from Bogota and show them BRT, or, when I was at NPC, we also took a big contingent to Berlin and Amsterdam. And those, when you take the agency officials and city officials and they see what can be, it does transform the way they think. And I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff, because oftentimes in the US, we're just kind of like, we can't do that here. But when they see it in action, it doesn't seem all that out of the realm of possibilities. So I appreciate that he did take the time to go over and see what places would that prioritize bikers and pedestrians do. But no, I don't have a slogan, but maybe that could be on our New Year's priorities. Because Build Back Better is just, yeah.
It sounds too much like another one that I don't like.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, maybe you can do that on Twitter.
That's
see what people.
That's a good idea. Do like a maybe put it out there to build to create a better one and a better slogan, and then hold a vote. Maybe that's the way to go. Do you all have any final thoughts on the mayor before we go into the puppies and butterflies?
I'll say I saw some Instagram, Fox News Instagram comments about him today. So I think that's interesting. Like I'm interested to see just the confirmation process and what comes up. Apparently he had to fire someone in his administration, and if you read the headline, you wouldn't know exactly what happened, which is, he fired someone that misspent funds. But we'll see. I'm usually historically these appointments have, gotten through, and I'm sure that, Biden was calling Mitch McConnell and other senators to talk about, his picks, because I'm sure he doesn't want anyone that couldn't get confirmed. But yeah, I'm just interested to see what comes up during the process.
The only thing I'll say is that, once again, just driving home, that I think I'm excited to see what he can do as a really good communicator and persuasive person, and someone who understands the system of transportation. At least it seems like someone that understands it holistically. And I really think that that's going to be such a key part of whatever happens. And the ability, once again, to talk to people all across and talk to and appeal to people across the political spectrum, I think is going to be his greatest strength. And so I'm really excited for the possibilities.
I also saw his husband tweeting about how Infrastructure Week's not going to be a joke anymore. And I think that's really great, kind of getting that back on track to where we take it a little bit more serious rather than seeing it as a joke. So I like that. And I think there, like I said, when we first started, when it came out, I think there was a little bit of vitriol, and I think Jerome, you saw some of that on Numtot. Got some of that pushback.
Let's not talk about it.
but I think that ultimately it's just, part of our jobs as well as advocates, but also as employees and things like that, is just to kind of, once it's there, we do what we can to make it better, no matter what the choices are. So I'm looking forward to putting my head down, and I'm heartened by what we've talked about today, but I'm looking forward to putting my head down and creating some solutions. So I hope that we get there. And there, I'm happy about that.
It's a very good point, Jeff.
All right. So this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways wouldn't be here without you. So thank you very much. And at the end of this year, I just want to say thank you to all the Patreon supporters, everybody that listens to the show, everybody that watched the YouTube video, on election night. I really, really appreciate it. And all our friends that we've interviewed as well. Thanks for coming on the show and supporting us. So we really appreciate that. So if you want to be a Patreon supporter, you can do so by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic, so we really appreciate that. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a nice card handwritten by me. Maybe not the best handwriting, but I'll send you one. And then $10 a month will get you our bus only scarf, which right now is sold out, but I have another order coming in. So, thanks so much for everybody that purchased the scarves and really appreciated them. And I'm sorry that we couldn't get some of them to folks for Christmas, but we'll have some after. And as always, if you want the bus only scarf, you can get one by going to theoverheadwire.com. So I also want to mention that we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice. And if you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com. It was American Planning Association 100 Essential Books of Planning. It's the first one on the list from the 1900s. So go check that out if you get a chance. Puppies and Butterflies is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe it just didn't fit in other sections. I have a Puppies and Butterflies, but do you all have something that has sparked joy in your life recently? The silence is deafening. Okay, maybe I should just go then.
Yeah. Jeff, go.
Well, so today on themayor.eu, which is a website that I follow from time to time about policies in other countries, they had a post on the Europe's Advent trams, which are all these trams in different cities in Europe that they put Christmas lights on and other things to make them festive for the holiday season. So they had, I saw a gingerbread tram, I saw one with Santa Claus hanging out the side, lights and stuff in Vienna and Bratislava and Vienna and all places like that. So I thought that was really fun, and I wish we could do those types of things. I know Caltrain does something here, but it'd be really fun if we had, and I think Chicago does something similar too. But it'd be really fun to have a Muni rail car or something with lights kind of going up and down the J tracks or something. That'd be fun.
Yeah, Chicago has a big one. They have Santa on the back of a L train. And it's all volunteers. They raise a bunch of money for homeless shelters, and I believe they end the ride at a homeless shelter, and they bring like food and presents for the kids. It's pretty exciting. I mean, there's a whole schedule where you can get on. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if it's happening this year, but it's pretty exciting to ride the holiday train or the Santa train every Christmas.
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up. I mean, there are actually several cities that try to do something similar. I know Baltimore has a holiday bus, and Philly has the Jolly Trolley. Actually, one of their trolleys that is decked out. I even saw Cleveland RTA, one of their light rail trains that they decorate. So I think that's great that agencies this year are still trying to run those trains and buses just to kind of cheer people up and give some people something else that's just a happy, pleasant thought. I think I read that the Cta Holiday Train is running, but I don't think they're allowing people to get on board of it this year. So it's just kind of roaming through the city. But it's really cool because I know each year it seems like they deck it out even more with high-powered LED lights and scrolling signs, and you can even see it from like helicopters in the air. And yeah,
even if you weren't on it, you would see it, because it's all elevated. So you don't have to be on it to experience. So I'm happy about that it's still running this year. Bring a little cheer.
Man,
to
Chicago
people.
must have the Christmas spirit. I feel like a lot of the movies that I've seen, Christmas movies I've seen, they all have Chicago scenes in them. And maybe that's just because it's a city environment that is easy to film in or something. But, Home Alone's there. Christmas Vacation's there. Christmas Chronicles is there.
Yeah.
Lots of Chicago. Really fascinating.
It's a fun city at Christmas.
Yeah.
But
It probably helps that it is Christmas, with the snow and all that stuff, the typical, what we think of as Christmas.
it's cold there right now.
Cold. All right. Jerome, where can folks find you online?
Yeah, if people want to find me, they can find me on Twitter at Cta Horne. That's JAHORNE. Instagram, the same. And then feel free to look me up on Facebook or LinkedIn. Typing in my name.
And Chrissy?
Yeah, I'm at Mancini Chrissy on Twitter and mycuriosity.com.
And thanks for joining us at Mondays at the Overhead Wire. Thanks to our generous Patreons for supporting this week's podcast. I want to thank Chrissy and Jerome for being here on our last show. Thank you all for coming and chatting and sharing your expertise and your time. And thank you for a good year, even though it was a little bit rough. But I think, we've been talking about stuff all year, and it's always a pleasure. And when Tracy comes on too, but it's always a pleasure to have folks on and have a little fun, during the week, even if it's a tough week and a tough year. So I really appreciate you all. And I just want to see, we'll be back after New Year's. So we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for having us.
Talking